Darkness does not always arrive with noise. Sometimes it settles quietly into hearts until people forget what light even looks like. Before the message of Islam, the world had reached such a moment, a time when truth was buried beneath pride, injustice, and desire. Humanity still worshipped, still prayed, still searched for meaning, but the connection to Allah had been distorted, fractured, and in many places completely lost. This is the world into which the final messenger of Allah would be born, not as a king, not as a conqueror, but as a mercy to all creation. Before we begin this journey, take a moment and tell us in the comments which country you are watching from, and if your heart loves Islam and the story of the Prophet, subscribe and stay with us until the end. Arabia at that time was a land of extremes, fierce loyalty and brutal cruelty existing side by side. Tribes ruled over people, not justice, and a man's worth was measured by his lineage, not his character. Blood feuds could last generations, and a single insult could ignite years of violence. The strong devoured the weak, women were treated as property, and daughters were sometimes buried alive out of shame and fear of poverty. The Kaaba, built by Prophet Ibrahim and his son Ismail for the worship of Allah alone, stood filled with idols, each one claiming a share of devotion that belonged only to the Creator. Trade flourished, poetry thrived, and eloquence was celebrated, yet moral decay ran deep beneath the surface. Beyond Arabia, great empires like Rome and Persia dominated lands with power and wealth, but corruption, oppression, and spiritual emptiness were widespread. Than revelation had not descended for centuries. Prophets had passed away, and mankind drifted without guidance, waiting for the final message without even knowing it. It was in this world that Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, was born in Mecca in the year of the elephant. His birth itself was quiet, humble, and almost unnoticed by the powerful, yet the heavens marked it as a turning point for all of creation. His father Abdullah had already passed away before he was born, leaving him to enter this world without a father's embrace. His mother Amina loved him deeply, but her life too was short, and before he reached the age of 6, she returned to Allah during a journey to Yathrib. In a society where lineage meant everything, he was an orphan, vulnerable by worldly standards, yet protected by Allah in ways unseen. After his mother's death, he came under the care of his grandfather, Abdul Muttalib, a respected leader of Quraysh, who saw in his grandson signs of a special destiny. He would seat him where no other child was allowed to sit, near the Kaaba, sensing an honor placed upon him by Allah. But even this protection did not last long, and Abdul Muttalib too passed away, leaving the young boy once again facing loss. He was then taken into the care of his uncle Abu Talib, a man of limited means, but immense loyalty and love. Under his uncle's roof, Muhammad learned patience, humility, and resilience. He worked as a shepherd, tending animals under the open sky, a role Allah had given to many prophets before him, teaching gentleness, responsibility, and reflection. As he grew, something about him stood apart from the people around him. While others drank alcohol, he stayed away. While idols were honored and celebrated, he felt no attraction toward them. He never lied, never cheated, never broke a trust, even though dishonesty was common in trade and daily life. People began to notice that his presence carried calm, that his words carried weight, and that his silence carried dignity. Long before prophethood, the people of Makkah began calling him Al-Amin, the trustworthy, and As-Sadiq, the truthful. When disputes arose, they sought his judgment. When valuables needed safeguarding, they entrusted them to him. Even those who would later become his fiercest enemies never accused him of lying before his message. Allah was shaping his character long before revelation descended. His heart was being purified from ignorance, his soul protected from corruption, and his conduct refined to reflect the weight of what he would soon carry. He lived among his people, shared their language and struggles, yet remained untouched by their moral decay. Every trial, every loss, every moment of solitude was preparing him for a mission that would shake empires and transform hearts. When the time came for revelation, no one could claim that he sought power, wealth, or status, because his entire life before prophethood stood as proof of his truthfulness. The world was drowning in darkness, but Allah had already lit the lamp that would soon illuminate every corner of human history. As Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, entered adulthood, the noise of Makkah grew louder around him, yet his heart felt increasingly distant, from it is less than #0. 5 is greater than. The marketplaces buzzed with trade and argument, poetry competitions filled the air with eloquence, and idols were paraded with pride, but none of it brought him peace. The more he observed his society, the more deeply troubled he became. He saw injustice celebrated as strength, oppression justified by tradition, and worship reduced to ritual without meaning. His heart rejected the idea that stone and wood could hear prayers, that wealth defined honor, or that power excused cruelty. Without having received revelation yet, Allah had already planted within him a natural inclination toward pure monotheism, a fitra untouched by ignorance. Gradually, he began to withdraw from the gatherings of Quraysh. He sought solitude not out of isolation, but out of a deep longing for truth. Outside the city of Makkah stood a mountain, and within it a small cave known as Hira. There, away from idols and arguments, he would spend nights in reflection. He would look toward the heavens, contemplate creation, and ponder the purpose of life. He fed the poor before leaving, and returned to his family with gentleness and care, never neglecting responsibility, even while seeking answers. In the stillness of that cave, his heart prepared itself for something unseen, something immense. He did not know that every moment of silence was drawing him closer to the moment that would change the destiny of mankind. Then came the night that shattered the stillness of history. While Muhammad was alone in the cave of Hira, wrapped in reflection, the angel Jibreel suddenly appeared before him, is less than #0. 5 is greater than. There was no gradual introduction, no gentle preparation, only a command that echoed with divine authority. Read. Overwhelmed and terrified, Muhammad replied that he could not read. The angel seized him and pressed him tightly until he felt his strength leave him, then released him and commanded again to read. The response was the same, followed by a third embrace, until the words of Allah descended for the first time into the human world. Read in the name of your Lord who created man from a clinging form. Read, and your Lord is the most generous, who taught by the pen, taught man that which he did not know. These words were not poetry, not magic, not the speech of man. They carried a weight that shook his soul. The cave that once held silence now held revelation, and the universe itself had shifted. Trembling, his heart racing, Muhammad descended the mountain and rushed home, repeating again and again that he feared for himself. Khadija wrapped him in a cloak, calming him as the shock of revelation washed over him. She listened as he described what had happened, and without hesitation, she spoke words that would echo through Islamic history. She reminded him that Allah would never disgrace a man who upheld family ties, spoke the truth, helped the poor, honored guests, and stood for justice. Her belief came not from emotion alone, but from years of witnessing his character. Khadija then took him to her cousin Waraka ibn Nawfal. A man knowledgeable in earlier scriptures is less than #0. 5 is greater than. When Waraka heard the account, his face changed, and he declared that the one who came to Muhammad was the same angel who had come to Musa. He warned that his people would one day drive him out, a statement that stunned Muhammad, who had known only respect and trust from his society. Yet the truth had been spoken, the path had been set, and there was no turning back. Revelation paused for a time, allowing the weight of the first encounter to settle, preparing the messenger of Allah for what lay ahead. When revelation resumed, it came with reassurance and purpose. O you who are wrapped in garments, arise and warn, and glorify your Lord, and purify your garments, and shun idols. The mission was now clear. He was commanded to call people to the worship of Allah alone, to warn them of accountability, and to lead by example. The message did not begin in palaces or public squares, but within the walls of his own home. Khadija believed without hesitation and became the first believer in Islam. Ali ibn Abi Talib, still a young boy living under his care, accepted the message with sincerity. Zayd ibn Haritha followed, and soon Abu Bakr, whose influence would quietly bring others into the fold. The early days of Islam were marked by secrecy and caution. Believers gathered quietly, learning the words of the Quran as they descended, verse by verse, shaping hearts before shaping society. The message focused on Tawhid, the oneness of Allah, the reality of the hereafter, moral accountability, and compassion toward the weak is less than #0. 5 is greater than. These early Muslims came from different backgrounds, slaves and nobles, men and women, united not by blood, but by faith. Each verse strengthened them, each prayer deepened their resolve. Muhammad taught them patience, humility, and trust in Allah, knowing that the road ahead would be long and painful. Despite the small numbers, something powerful was unfolding. Islam did not spread through force, wealth, or promises of status. It spread through truth that resonated with the soul. The Quran challenged minds, softened hearts, and confronted injustice without compromise. Every believer carried the weight of a new identity, one that placed obedience to Allah above tribe, tradition, and fear. Muhammad himself remained humble, praying through the night, reciting the Quran with tears, and carrying the burden of his people with compassion. He knew persecution would come, but he also knew that Allah was with him. In the silence of secret gatherings and whispered prayers, the foundation of a global faith was being laid, one soul at a time. When the command came to proclaim the message openly, everything changed. What had once been whispered in quiet homes now echoed across the valleys of Makkah. Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, stood before his people and called them to abandon the idols of their ancestors and return to the worship of Allah alone. He warned them of a day when wealth, lineage, and power would mean nothing, and every soul would stand alone before its creator is less than #0. 5 is greater than. At first, there was stunned silence, then disbelief, then laughter, and finally, open hostility. The leaders of Quraysh were not angered simply by theology. They were threatened by what Islam exposed. If all people were equal before Allah, then their authority crumbled. If idols were false, their trade collapsed. If the weak had rights, their privilege vanished. They mocked the Prophet, calling him a poet, a madman, a liar, even though they knew in their hearts he had never lied to them. They placed thorns in his path, dumped filth on him while he prayed, and spread rumors to poison minds against him. Yet he responded with restraint, patience, and dignity. His voice did not rise in anger, and his message did not soften in fear. As opposition intensified, Quraysh turned their cruelty toward the believers. Those without tribal protection were tortured mercilessly. Bilal ibn Rabah was dragged into the desert, his body pressed against burning sand, a heavy stone crushing his chest as he was commanded to renounce Allah. With every breath, he responded with one word, Allah is one. Others were beaten, starved, chained, and humiliated, their only crime being belief. Families were torn apart, parents disowned children, and marriages were broken by faith. Through it all, the Prophet grieved for his followers, praying for them, strengthening them, reminding them that paradise lay ahead for those who endured. When the oppression became unbearable, he permitted some believers to migrate to Abyssinia is less than #0. 5 is greater than he, chose this land because its ruler was known for justice, a king who did not oppress anyone under his protection. Quraysh pursued them, attempting to bring them back, but the truth of Islam spoken before the king softened his heart. The Muslims were allowed to remain in safety, a reminder that Allah opens doors even when the world seems closed. Still, Quraysh escalated their efforts. When torture failed, they turned to economic warfare. A brutal boycott was imposed against the Prophet and his clan. No one was allowed to trade with them, marry them, or support them in any way. For years, they were trapped in isolation, surviving on leaves, enduring hunger so severe that children cried through the night. Muhammad endured the same suffering, refusing comfort while others starved. He shared every hardship, proving that leadership in Islam meant sacrifice, not privilege. When the boycott finally ended, weakened and exhausted, the Prophet faced a new wave of loss. Within a short span of time, Khadija, his beloved wife, his confidant, his first believer, returned to Allah. She had stood beside him through ridicule, poverty and fear, giving everything she had for the sake of Islam. Her death left a silence in his home and a wound in his heart that never fully healed. Soon after, Abu Talib, his uncle and protector, also passed away. Though he never accepted Islam, he had shielded the Prophet from assassination and tribal violence. With his death, the last barrier protecting Muhammad from Quraysh collapsed is less than #0. 5 is greater than. This period became known as the Year of Sorrow. Grief pressed heavily upon him, yet the burden of the message did not lift. Instead, he carried it forward with tears in his prayers and resolve in his heart. Seeking a place where the message might be received, he traveled to Taif. Rather than welcoming him, its leaders mocked him and incited children and slaves to stone him. He was driven out bleeding, his sandals filled with blood, collapsing beneath the weight of rejection and pain. In that moment, when any human heart might turn bitter, he turned to Allah. He did not ask for revenge. He did not curse his attackers. Instead, he prayed that if this suffering was not a sign of Allah's displeasure, then he accepted it. Even when offered the destruction of Taif by the Angel of the Mountains, he refused, hoping that their descendants might one day believe. This mercy, shown at the height of pain, revealed the true nature of the Prophet's mission. Despite loss, persecution, and isolation, the message did not die. Every hardship refined the believers. Every tear carried meaning. Allah was preparing them for a future beyond Makkah, beyond suffering, beyond imagination. The years of open hostility, brutal persecution, and personal sorrow forged a community grounded in faith rather than comfort. What seemed like defeat was in reality the foundation of victory. And even in the darkest nights of grief, Allah was guiding his messenger toward a dawn that would soon change the world. At a time when grief weighed heavily upon his heart, and the earth itself seemed to narrow around him, Allah opened the heavens for his messenger in a way no human had ever experienced before is less than #0. 5 is greater than one night. Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, was taken from the sacred mosque in Mecca to the farthest mosque in Jerusalem in a journey that defied distance and time. This was not a dream nor a vision of imagination, but a real journey decreed by Allah as comfort, honor, and reassurance after years of rejection and pain. In Jerusalem, he led the prophets in prayer, standing at the front of a line that included Ibrahim, Musa, Isa, and many others, a silent declaration that his message completed and unified all that came before. From there, he ascended through the heavens, layer by layer, witnessing signs beyond human comprehension. He saw the angels, the vastness of creation, paradise and hellfire, and realities hidden from the worldly eye. At each level he was welcomed by earlier prophets, each affirming his mission and praying for his success. At the highest point, where even the angel Jibreel could go no further, Muhammad stood alone before his Lord in a manner befitting Allah's majesty. There, Allah gifted the Ummah with the 5 daily prayers, a direct connection between servant and creator, not through intermediaries, but through devotion and humility. What was first prescribed as 50 prayers was reduced to 5, while retaining the reward of 50, a mercy reflecting Allah's compassion toward humanity. When the Prophet returned to Makkah by morning, his body bore no sign of travel, yet his soul carried the weight of revelation. Quraysh mocked him when he spoke of the journey, but those whose hearts were firm in faith believed without hesitation is less than #0. 5 is greater than. This night was not meant to convince the arrogant, but to strengthen the sincere and remind the messenger that Allah had not abandoned him. As opposition in Makkah intensified, Allah prepared a new path for his messenger. During the pilgrimage seasons, people from distant lands came to Makkah, and among them were men from Yathrib, a city divided by tribal conflict and longing for peace. When they heard the message of Islam, their hearts opened. They pledged allegiance to the Prophet, promising to protect him as they would their own families if he migrated to their city. This pledge marked a turning point, as Islam moved from a persecuted faith to a community with a place to grow. Allah then commanded migration. Quraysh plotted to kill Muhammad, gathering representatives from every tribe to strike him at once. Yet Allah protected his messenger once again. Ali ibn Abi Talib slept in the Prophet's bed, while Muhammad quietly left his home, trusting fully in Allah. Along with Abu Bakr, he hid in the cave of Thor, as Quraysh searched relentlessly for them. When enemies stood just outside the cave, Abu Bakr feared for the Prophet's safety, but Muhammad reassured him that Allah was the third of them. A spider's web and a bird's nest became signs of divine protection, turning the plans of Quraysh into failure. The journey to Yathrib was filled with danger, yet guided by calm certainty. Every step marked a transition from persecution to purpose. When the Prophet finally arrived, the city erupted with joy is less than #0. 5 is greater than men, women and children lined the streets, singing words of welcome, their hearts overflowing with hope. Yathrib became Medina, the city of the Prophet, and with it began a new era in human history. In Medina, the Prophet did not seek power or comfort. His first act was to build a mosque, a place of prayer, learning and unity. It was simple, built with his own hands alongside his companions, reflecting humility and shared purpose. From this center, he shaped a community unlike any the world had known. He established brotherhood between the migrants from Makkah and the helpers of Medina, binding hearts together beyond blood and tribe. Wealth was shared, homes were opened, and sacrifice became a way of life. The Prophet also established agreements with different groups in Medina, ensuring justice, mutual protection, and religious freedom. Leadership under Islam was not tyranny, but responsibility. Law was guided by revelation, mercy tempered authority, and accountability applied to all. Muhammad lived among his people as one of them, eating simple food, repairing his own belongings, and listening to the concerns of the poorest. His nights were filled with prayer, his days with service. Through patience, wisdom, and unwavering faith, a fractured city became a united ummah. Islam was no longer only words revealed in hardship, but a living example of justice, compassion, and devotion. The foundations laid in Medina would soon echo far beyond its walls. What began as a persecuted call in Makkah had now become a complete way of life, guided by revelation and embodied by the Messenger of Allah, is less than #0. 5 hashes greater than, and though trials still lay ahead, the path forward was now illuminated by faith, unity, and the promise of divine support. As the Muslim community in Medina grew stronger, the forces of disbelief could no longer ignore it. Quraysh saw Islam not only as a spiritual challenge, but as a threat to their power, trade routes, and authority. What followed was not a series of wars driven by conquest, but a struggle for survival, faith, and dignity. The first major confrontation came at Badr, when a small group of believers, poorly equipped and vastly outnumbered, stood against a powerful army from Mecca. The Muslims did not march out seeking battle, yet when confrontation became inevitable, they placed their trust in Allah alone. The Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, spent the night in prayer, raising his hands and calling upon Allah with humility and urgency, knowing that if this small group were destroyed, the message itself would be at risk. When the battle unfolded, victory came not through numbers or weapons, but through divine support. The Quran would later remind the believers that angels were sent to assist them, and that triumph came from Allah alone. Badr became a defining moment, proving that faith anchored in sincerity could overcome even the greatest odds. Yet this victory did not lead to arrogance. The Prophet emphasized mercy toward prisoners and gratitude toward Allah, teaching that success was a test, just as hardship was. The following years brought new trials is less than #0. 5 hash is greater than at Uhud. The Muslims faced a painful lesson. Despite early success, a moment of disobedience and desire for worldly gain led to chaos. The Prophet himself was injured, rumors spread that he had been killed, and fear shook the battlefield. Yet even in defeat, revelation guided the believers, teaching them accountability, patience, and reliance upon Allah. The Prophet forgave those who erred, reminding the Ummah that leadership meant mercy and correction, not condemnation. Soon after came the Battle of the Trench, when multiple tribes united to erase Islam entirely. Facing overwhelming numbers, the Muslims dug a trench around Medina, a strategy unfamiliar to Arabian warfare. For weeks they endured hunger, cold, and fear as enemies camped outside their city. The Prophet worked alongside his companions, lifting stones, encouraging them with words of hope, reminding them that Allah's promise was near. When the coalition finally collapsed without a decisive battle, it became clear that the balance of power had shifted. Islam was no longer on the brink of extinction. The threat now lay with those who opposed it. Yet the greatest victories of Islam would not come through the sword, but through patience and restraint. When the Prophet set out for pilgrimage and was stopped at Hudaybiyah, the terms imposed by Quraysh appeared humiliating. The Muslims were turned away from the sacred mosque, required to delay their pilgrimage, and forced to accept conditions that seemed unfair. Many companions struggled to understand is less than #0. 5 hash is greater than. But the Prophet accepted the treaty, trusting Allah's wisdom over human emotion. What appeared to be a setback became a clear victory. With peace secured, people were able to listen without fear. Islam spread more rapidly in 2 years of peace than it had in all the years of conflict. The Prophet sent letters inviting rulers beyond Arabia to Islam, conveying the message with dignity and confidence. Hudaybiyah proved that restraint could achieve what force could not, and that Allah's plan unfolds beyond immediate perception. When Quraysh violated the treaty, the response was decisive yet restrained. The Prophet marched toward Mecca with an army unlike any Arabia had seen, yet with strict orders to avoid bloodshed. The city that once expelled him now stood defenseless. As he entered Mecca, his head was lowered in humility, not raised in pride. The idols around the Kaaba were destroyed, one by one, as truth replaced falsehood. The people of Mecca, many of whom had tortured, mocked, and plotted his death, waited for judgment. Instead, they were met with mercy. The Prophet declared general forgiveness, echoing the legacy of Yusuf when he forgave his brothers. No revenge was taken. No homes were seized. No blood was spilled in triumph. Hearts that had resisted Islam for decades now surrendered willingly. This conquest was not the fall of a city, but the collapse of arrogance and injustice. Islam entered Makkah not as a conqueror's flag, but as a moral awakening is less than #0. 5 is greater than the Kaaba was restored to its original purpose, worship of Allah alone. The Prophet returned to the city that once rejected him, not to rule as a tyrant, but to heal as a messenger. Through battles and treaties, losses and victories, one truth remained constant. The mission of Muhammad was never about dominance, but about guidance. Every decision reflected submission to Allah, every hardship strengthened the Ummah, and every moment moved humanity closer to justice, mercy, and truth. The road had been long and painful, but now the light of Islam stood unchallenged at the heart of Arabia, ready to spread far beyond its deserts. After the return of Makkah to the worship of Allah alone, the transformation of Arabia accelerated in a way unseen in history. Tribes that had once watched Islam from a distance now arrived in delegations, eager to hear directly from the Messenger of Allah. Men who had fought against him, mocked him, and feared his message now sat humbly before him, listening to verses of the Quran that seemed to speak directly to their hearts. This period became known as the Year of Delegations, not because Islam was forced upon anyone, but because truth, justice, and mercy had become undeniable. The Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, welcomed each group with patience and wisdom. He taught them that Islam was not merely a set of rituals, but a complete way of life grounded in accountability to Allah. He emphasized prayer, honesty, compassion, and responsibility toward the weak is less than #0. 5 is greater than. Despite ruling over a rapidly expanding community, he lived simply, sleeping on a rough mat, mending his own clothes, and eating modest food. Wealth flowed into Medina, yet his lifestyle never changed. He distributed resources fairly, never storing for himself what could ease the burden of others. As Islam spread across Arabia, the Prophet remained deeply aware that his mission was nearing completion. Revelation confirmed that the message had been perfected and that Allah's favor was complete. Still, he continued teaching, correcting, and guiding with the same care he had shown from the beginning. His concern was not the size of the Ummah, but the strength of its faith. He warned against returning to arrogance, injustice, and division. He reminded them that leadership was a trust, and that the true measure of a person was piety, not lineage or power. In the 10th year after migration, the Prophet announced his intention to perform pilgrimage. News spread quickly, and tens of thousands gathered to accompany him. This would be his final pilgrimage, though many did not yet realize it. On the plains of Arafat, beneath the open sky, the Messenger of Allah delivered words that would echo until the end of time. He reminded the people of the sanctity of life, property, and honor. He declared that no Arab held superiority over a non-Arab, and no non-Arab over an Arab, except through righteousness. He emphasized the rights of women, the importance of justice, and the responsibility to hold firmly to the Quran, and his Sunnah is less than #0. 5 is greater than. As he spoke, the weight of farewell settled into his words. He asked the people if he had conveyed the message fully. When they affirmed it, he raised his finger toward the sky and called Allah as witness. On that day the verse was revealed, declaring that the religion had been perfected and Allah's favor completed. Many companions sensed that this was not merely a sermon, but a goodbye. After returning to Medina, the Prophet continued leading prayers and guiding his people, yet his physical strength began to fade. He fell ill, experiencing pain that reminded the Ummah that even the Messenger of Allah was human. Despite his illness, his concern remained focused on prayer, unity, and compassion. He repeatedly emphasized the importance of salah and kindness to those under one's care. When he could no longer lead the prayers, he instructed that Abu Bakr take his place, signaling trust and continuity. In his final days, he freed slaves, returned borrowed items, and ensured that no injustice remained unresolved. He visited the graves of martyrs, prayed for his ummah, and sought forgiveness for them. Surrounded by his family, his voice weakened, yet his message remained firm. On his final morning, he lifted the curtain of his room and looked upon the believers lined in prayer. A smile crossed his face, a moment of peace in the midst of farewell. Soon after, resting against Aisha, he whispered words expressing his choice of the highest companionship. With that, his soul returned to Allah is less than #0. 5 is greater than the city of Medina, was shaken by grief. Some could not accept the reality of his passing, but the message he delivered did not die. It lived on in the Quran, in the Sunnah, and in the hearts of those he transformed. The mission was complete. Revelation had ended, but guidance remained. The Prophet left behind no wealth, no monuments, and no throne. He left behind a path illuminated by faith, mercy, justice, and submission to Allah. And through every generation that follows, his life continues to speak, reminding humanity that true success lies not in power or possession, but in obedience to the Creator and compassion toward creation. The moment the soul of Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, returned to Allah, the world seemed to stop breathing. Medina, once filled with his presence, his voice, and his guidance, fell into a silence heavier than any battlefield. The companions who had lived every moment of their lives around him now struggled to understand a reality that felt impossible. Some were frozen in shock, others wept openly, and some refused to accept what their hearts could not bear. Umar ibn al-Khattab stood among the people, declaring that the Messenger of Allah had not died, insisting that he had only gone to meet his Lord and would return, his words reflecting not denial of faith, but the depth of love and loss. In that moment of collective grief, Abu Bakr entered quietly and went to see the Prophet. He uncovered his blessed face, leaned down, and kissed his forehead is less than #0. 5 is greater than. With tears flowing, he affirmed that Muhammad had indeed passed away, yet remained the most beautiful of creation, in life and in death. Abu Bakr then stepped outside to address the people, whose emotions threatened to overwhelm reason. With a steady voice, he reminded them of a truth that would anchor the Ummah forever. Whoever worshipped Muhammad, then Muhammad has died, but whoever worships Allah, then Allah is ever living and never dies. He then recited the verse declaring that Muhammad was only a messenger and that messengers had passed away before him. In that moment, it was as if the words were being heard for the first time. Hearts broke, but faith was restored. The companions realized that the Prophet had completed his mission exactly as Allah decreed. He had delivered the message fully, without withholding a single command or concealing a single truth. His passing was not an end to Islam, but a test of whether the Ummah would live by what he taught or collapse without his physical presence. They prepared his body with care and reverence, burying him in the very place where he had passed, as prophets are buried where they die. There was no grand procession, no display of power or wealth, only quiet tears and hearts heavy with responsibility. Yet even in death, his influence did not fade. The teachings he left behind immediately began guiding the decisions of the companions. The Quran he delivered remained recited in prayers and memorized in hearts. His Sunnah became the lens through which every action was measured is less than #0. 5 is greater than leadership, was not seized through ambition, but accepted as a burden of accountability. The Ummah moved forward not united by his physical presence, but by obedience to Allah and loyalty to the path he established. As years passed and generations followed, the legacy of Muhammad continued to unfold. He had entered the world as an orphan and left it having transformed humanity. He did not leave behind palaces, armies, or inherited wealth. He left behind a complete way of life. Through the Quran, he taught humanity who Allah is. Through his character, he showed humanity how to live. Through his mercy, he demonstrated how strength and compassion coexist. His life became the ultimate reference for justice. When leaders ruled, they were measured against his humility. When judges judged, they were measured against his fairness. When the strong dealt with the weak, they were measured against his mercy. When individuals worshipped, they followed his example of devotion, sincerity, and humility before Allah. He taught that true honor lies in righteousness, that true success lies in obedience to Allah, and that true wealth lies in contentment. Across continents and centuries, his name continued to be spoken with reverence. Millions rose before dawn to pray, as he prayed. Millions fasted, as he fasted. Millions shaped their character around his patience, honesty, and forgiveness. Even those who never met him felt his presence through his words, and example is less than #0. 5# is greater than his life. Bridged heaven and earth, revelation and reality, belief and action. He taught that power does not justify injustice. That knowledge without humility leads to ruin. That worship without character is hollow. And that the strongest person is not the one who defeats others, but the one who controls anger and forgives when able. These were not abstract ideals, but principles he lived by in moments of victory and defeat, wealth and poverty, love and loss. The final messenger of Allah came to remove chains from hearts, not to place new ones upon them. He came to restore dignity to the forgotten, justice to the oppressed, and purpose to the lost. He reminded humanity that life is a trust, that death is a certainty, and that meeting Allah is inevitable. His farewell was not silence, but guidance that continues to speak. And so his story does not end at the moment of his passing. It lives on every time a believer chooses truth over falsehood. Every time mercy is shown where revenge is possible. Every time justice is upheld despite personal cost. Every time a heart turns sincerely toward Allah. Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, fulfilled his trust completely. He conveyed the message, he lived the message, and he left behind a path clear enough that no one need be lost again. His life stands as proof that guidance from Allah can transform individuals, societies, and the course of history itself. Peace and blessings be upon the final messenger, upon his family, upon his companions, and upon all who follow his path until the day they meet their Lord.